brush your teeth daily. Stay away from cavity and pain.
What is a cavity? Hi, my name is Dr. Muhammad, aka the Tooth God. I was here watching this funny video. It's actually an AI generated video I saw on TikTok. And it was about this little kid's tooth that gets engulfed by this cavity monster. And it really sparked an idea for me based on a lot of questions that I get from patients, which is simple. What is a cavity? What is a cavity? What do dentists mean when they use the term cavity? What causes it, how to treat it, and what does the word mean? I think we all generally have an idea of what we feel like it is, but what we feel or think it is can be a little bit different from what it actually entails, and it may bear some fruitful information for you just understanding the whole dynamics behind it. So if we just take the term cavity, a cavity just means, it's defined by the dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, as an empty space within a solid object.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
So of course we have a cavity in our chest, our thoracic cavity, and a bunch of different cavities all throughout the body, which are just these little spaces. When we're talking about a dental cavity, it's kind of a similar sentiment. A lot of times what will happen in the tooth is it will break down and formulate a hole within the tooth, and sometimes you can't notice it from the outside. Not all cavities are visible holes. So sometimes a cavity is so big and pronounced that we can literally see a cavity, as the word suggests, self-explanatory, but many times they're not. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So here I'm gonna have on the screen somewhere showing some cavities in between teeth. So they have the title superficial decay, but the main thing I want you guys to look at is we can look at the cavities forming in between the teeth on an x-ray. So this is an x-ray. If you see these little dark shadows which break up the more white shadowy substance, that is where you know it's a cavity in the area. And so we have arrows pointing to it, some bigger than others, little red boxes around others, but it's showing dental cavities. Now, why I want to show you these are because this type of cavity you most likely would not see in the mouth. Unless it's a pretty deep cavity, usually people cannot feel it, even though it's most certainly possible, at least not in a significant way. Sometimes if you have a cavity, one sensation that some people report is when you eat sweets, there's a little bit of an achy sensation. But it's usually not something severe, significant, keeps you up at night, anything like that. It's just a little bit of sensation after you eat something sticky or a sweet or something of that nature. That may be a symptom of a cavity, but for the most part, cavities are usually largely asymptomatic from self-reporting by the patient. So now that is a far cry away from a cavity like the one right here, which is a big blown out tooth. You can clearly see the physical hole in the tooth. Of course, that's an obvious one. You don't need to be a dentist to diagnose that. But a lot of times we'll live in between both of those areas, something that's not completely undetectable, but also not something that jumps off the screen like this big blown out tooth. And a lot of them that we'll see are these little small defective restorations in between. And what I mean by defective restoration is this is a tooth that's been filled before, which you can see a cavity here, and you can see these little discolorations that you see right here. But before we go any further, I'm talking about cavities, what they look like and whatever, but I still have not answered my initial question. What is a cavity? What a cavity is permanent damage done to a tooth done by tooth decay. Okay? A cavity is when you have permanent damage done to the tooth, which is caused by tooth decay. It starts on the outermost layer, this little tooth decay. It starts spreading within the tooth, and when it gets deep into the tooth, it goes into the area with the nerves and starts infecting that area, and you start having pain, and we have to do something else. But typically we call it a cavity before it gets super deep. as long as it's not super deep, then we can consider it a cavity. Even though usually when the cavity only exists very superficially, like on the enamel, we usually don't refer to it as an actual cavity, though you could. Okay, this may beg the question of, what causes tooth decay? What causes the tooth decay or cavity? Because that's really what it is. A cavity is tooth decay in layman's terms. Is kind of what we're talking about. I know we said a cavity is the hole that results from tooth decay, but a lot of times we refer to the decay itself as caries or the cavity for layman's terms, even though it's not the hole itself. Okay, so what causes this cavity phenomenon? Well, I want you to answer that first. So I'm gonna put a little quiz on the board and I'm gonna ask you, which of these elements do you believe directly cause dental cavities? You can pause the video, give yourself like a 10-second timer if you want to. And so yeah. All right. Well, if you answered acid, you would be correct. Okay, so now if I show you this diagram, you'll see this little Venn diagram where this overlapping is showing a bunch of different factors. So we have time, which is a factor, acid, which was the direct cause, sugar and bacteria, and when they all merge together, they form a cavity. And this is true in a practical sense. In a practical sense, you need all of these factors together to form a dental cavity. However, why the answer is acid and not the other ones is because acid is the only direct cause of a cavity. Because if you have any of the other factors without the presence of acid, you will not form a cavity. However, if you have acid in the presence of the tooth without any of the other factors, well, time is a weird one. You need to do the time. Well, it depends on how acidic it is. Okay. However, if you have acid in the presence of a tooth without any of the other factors, you can still generate a cavity, which is what we see here. So we have this decay equation, which you see sugar from something that we're eating, the bacteria, which are going to populate our teeth always because they just exist in nature. They will produce acid, and we'll get a little bit more into this. Or we have this other example where we just have simple acid on a healthy tooth, which causes decay. So examples of these are people like with acid reflux. So if you have acid reflux, throw up a lot, anything like that, or a very acidic diet, if you were to, for some reason, to drink battery acid or suck on lemons, which is a more practical sense, you would still have this result of tooth decay even without the bacteria or sugar needing to be involved. So acid directly causes it. The other factors just help with the production of acid to speed up the decaying process. So acid directly causes cavities. That's a nice little fun fact trivia question you can ask your friends. Most people don't get that one. But yeah. Now, where does the acid come from? So you're saying, okay, doc, you're saying acid, not bacteria. Then why do we have to brush our teeth? Why sugar? They talk to us about sugar all the time. This is the first time I'm hearing of this acid. Well, maybe not. This may not be the first time you're hearing of this acid, because it actually exists in many different other phenomena that we can see in nature. So the type of acid we're talking about is lactic acid. Now, lactic acid you will find throughout the body in different processes. So lactic acid comes from the bacteria. There's different ways that we can take food and turn food into energy. Okay? So I don't want to bore you guys with chemistry details, but if you ever learned about glycolysis and all that stuff, it's basically the process that we do as humans. We eat food and then we convert that food into energy. Okay? In that conversion, there's all types of byproducts, but we don't really concern too much about those because all of them are pretty much beneficial for the body and help us do other things. We kind of recycle them to be efficient. However, when other organisms sometimes do this process of turning food into energy, the byproducts they produce are not always beneficial to us, and one of the times we see this is lactic acid. Now, bacteria are not the only people who can produce lactic acid. We actually produce it. So lactic acid is also the thing that kind of causes that burning sensation when you're using a muscle. So if you're in the gym and you're bench pressing a whole lot and you get to that last set and you start to feel the burn after a while, then that's lactic acid buildup. That buildup is because you have to go to this other energy pathway when you don't have a lot of oxygen because you used it all in that muscle area. And so therefore, now instead of doing the regular byproduct way, which is not as harmful, that regular energy production pathway that I was referencing a little earlier, we have to go to the bacteria type of energy production because, you know, they only use the small amount of energy. They don't need oxygen for that. So when we lack oxygen, we go to this as our plan B. And we go ahead and produce lactic acid, and you can feel the burn. That's one area of lactic acid. Lactic acid fermentation is also used in a lot of food production. So I went to this website. It's called Savory and Sour Test Kitchen, and they were talking about how they produce different foods, and they were talking about how lactic acid fermentation is one of the processes which make the foods like cheese, yogurt, sauerkraut, and Brussels sprouts and things of that nature. They use that bacteria to produce acid, which helps in the fermentation process of those type of foods so that we can enjoy their soury, acidic type of flavor. And another type of fermentation you can see is alcoholic fermentation. They referenced in when you use yeast. So when you give sugar to these certain type of bacteria, they produce lactic acid. Just like if you give sugar to yeast, they produce alcohol, and that's another way we produce alcohol. That's that fermentation process. So this fermentation process producing acid, okay, is how we get, you know, cavity. But, you know, let's get a little bit more specific than that. So when we have acid in the presence of a tooth, well, how does that necessarily cause a cavity? Some of you are like, well, duh, the acid erodes it. But some of you guys like to be a little bit more scientific. I said scientific. Some of you guys like to be a little bit more scientific. So if we want to talk about that, we can talk about, really, it's just the idea of this one principle called Le Chatelier's principle. Le Chatelier. I think it's a French man from way back when. But Le Chatelier's principle is actually very simple, kind of common sense, but you can apply it mathematically to make it a little bit more practical, which is simply things tend to move towards equilibrium. So if something's not balanced over here, if we have two sides of a coin, if you have a whole lot of stuff over here, less stuff over here, the whole lot of stuff gonna move to the side with less stuff so they can equal out. Same thing with temperature. Something super hot here and you put it on a super cold plate, there will be a heat exchange to a degree to where both the plate and the hot thing start to become around the same temperature, yada yada yada. So it's kind of balanced, namaste, so to speak. So we can do that same application when we talk about acidity, pH. It's the same situation. So if we have some acid producing bacteria on our teeth and we provide them with food, as our good friends in the kitchen told us, if we apply sugar in the presence of this type of bacteria, what we get is acid. Boom, we get this acid buildup. So we got all this acid buildup and it's around the tooth. And so now you got acid around the tooth. How does acid going around the tooth break down that tooth from this strong thing to this mushy cavity hole that you were talking about earlier? Well, it's simple. Like I said, things like to go towards equilibrium. So teeth are actually made up of this molecule. One molecule. One of the things that make up teeth is this molecule called hydroxyapatite. It's kind of the molecule that makes things crystalline or hard, which kind of gives teeth their structural integrity, makes them real firm. It's the same mineral that kind of makes up bone. It makes it very hard and dense. And so you have this molecule which is comprised of a few different things. You got calcium. You know, you always think drink your calcium, milk, bone strong. Think that strong calcium, phosphate, and hydroxide. So you have the acid on the outside. It sees the basic nature of those molecules or those minerals which make up hydroxyapatite in the tooth. And what it will start to do is just start seeping a lot of those bases out, because acids like to pair with bases to form this neutral water equilibrium, and then they salt. It's a background. It's like a byproduct. But it's the same thing. So calcium and phosphate get seeped out. And also hydroxide can be used that way as well. So they're just seeping out the minerals which make the tooth strong. And so the tooth starts to crumble and become weak. And so now you have this weak, mushy, crumbling structure of tooth, rotten tooth, which is now decayed because of the acid mixed in with bacteria, and it's like wet, mushy mess. That's how dentists can kind of tell if you have a cavity, because they're feeling it. Stain, so if we go back to this picture earlier, where it was like clearly a cavity, but we didn't go too deep in it because it's so stained, like this one right here. Now this one's pretty obviously a cavity, but there is a world where this is not. You know what I mean? Like there's a world where this is not. And why I mean that is because, you know, like I said, maybe not to this degree, but certain things, coffee stain, tea, coffee plus other things, tobacco, there's a bunch of different things that can stain teeth. And you can even have cavities kind of start on the outside, and then you provide a therapy to them. We'll talk about the therapy a little later, to go ahead and stop the cavity, and it will still have this dark color turning effect. So you can't necessarily diagnose a cavity just by looking at them unless you can visibly see a hole, like this picture over here. You can visibly see the hole, so that is literally a cavity. A cavity is just that damage caused to the tooth, turning it into this mushy mess that no one wants to deal with, and it's infected, it's no longer healthy, and it's going to continue to produce acid and keep going, because now the environment's more acidic. It's going to grow more of those acid producing bacteria on it, and it's going to just keep this process going and keep tunneling through that tooth until it gets to the nerve, and you know, you come to the doctor yelling, screaming, all that type of stuff. All right, so we talked about lactic acid fermentation, which is how the bacteria produce the acid. They get the fuel to produce the acid from anything that you eat. So if you're eating anything, you're giving them the fuel. Where the bacteria come from? Everywhere. They're always going to be there. They're omnipotent in this regard. As soon as you finish brushing your teeth, the moment you stop doing anything from the air, bacteria will begin repopulating the tooth. Step one, so cavity formation, what we talked about so far. One, the bacteria have to get on the tooth. Bacteria are everywhere. So as soon as you finish brushing your teeth, just think one by one, slowly but surely, bacteria will start dogpiling back on the tooth. Not the end of the world. Not every bacteria which is going to jump on these teeth are bad. And the better, or the more healthy of an oral biome we have or have facilitated, the more likely that it will be good bacteria to jump on our teeth. But step two, they start to recruit their friends and proliferate. They start to replicate. It's more of them. They start saying, everybody, hey, the water's nice on this tooth. You know, everybody come join. So boom, y'all join it, and you keep it acidic. You just had a sour head, some lemon drops, and all types of stuff, a soda, you know. So boom, you making it, you know, extra fun for them to come. So they keep doing that. Then after they're there, they form a plaque. Bacteria are on the tooth, and they start to replicate a whole lot. Many bacteria. They decide to do what, you know, people do or organisms do when they want to become stronger, and they band together. There's a movie, Planet of the Apes, where Caesar had a group of sticks, and he held them together, and it was only like one or maybe two, and he broke it, and he showed apes apart weak. So like if we're fighting, we're weak, but then he put a bunch of sticks together and tried to break it. He couldn't, to demonstrate that apes together strong. This is what we see with bacteria and a plaque. This process right here, when they band together and form the plaque, actually make them more resistant to you detaching them than they would individually, you know, because they're together, strong. After they become this plaque, if you feed them, they will then start producing energy. Their energy production involves the production of acid, which actually hurts our tooth, because once the acid seeps out of the tooth, it starts to seep out all the minerals that we need to keep our tooth nice and strong in that hydroxyapatite, and turn it into this mushy, infected glob. Once that happens, now it is remedy time. Well, once it has turned into this gushy mook, deeper enough into the tooth, not superficial on the enamel only, well, the dentist now has to fill it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next video. What is a dental filling? And we'll go over that more in detail. So what do we do with this information? Well, we want to focus on two things: prevention and restoration. Prevention is something you can focus on at home. Really, only something you can focus on at home. You know, all you have to do to prevent the cavity from forming is break up or disrupt this process at any point in time before the acid production turns into loss of those minerals that are vital. That process of losing those minerals is called demineralization. We just have to break up this process anytime in between them. So how do we do that? Well, we can literally physically remove the bacteria and or the plaque from the teeth. Because if there's no bacteria on the teeth, no plaque on the teeth, then we're not producing acid and we're not going to decay the tooth, assuming that you don't have acid reflux or something like that. Okay, so there we go. So just physically, mechanically removing this. Now, of course, this is better done with like an electric toothbrush because that's like a power washer versus like scrubbing something. But you know, it doesn't have to be. Even going back into ancient times, people used to use these bristled sticks called miswax. This is a perfectly fine way of cleaning your teeth, but you would have to do it pretty constantly to keep trying to break up this formula. So they would do it all the time. The second thing that is very important in this process, or is very significant in this process, is fluoride. Now, why is fluoride important? Now, a lot of people have some type of controversy about fluoride. I do want you guys to know that fluoride is unnatural. The miswax actually that they use, they wouldn't just grab random trees and do this. They would actually use a specific tree, actually something called the Salvadora persica. And that tree, the bark of it naturally contained fluoride. That's another reason it was also effective in preventing tooth decay. Besides just mechanically removing the teeth, it was actually restoring the teeth. So what does fluoride do? So remember that hydroxyapatite molecule I was telling you guys about? Well, what fluoride does is twofold. One is fluoride, instead of having regular hydroxyapatite, it will start to substitute out for the hydroxide groups. Remember I told you this was going to be important, this little OH group right here? The fluoride will take its place. And fluoride is actually a much bigger molecule than the hydroxide molecule, also making it a much more stable molecule and something harder to break down. So if we look at like hydroxyapatite versus fluoroapatite here, you can see you see those big dark blue circles are the fluoroapatite, the small one hydroxyapatite. This molecule, the big one over here, is just much more difficult to break down than the hydroxyapatite. The second thing is, many times people do not brush in time to stop the beginning of turning from the acid to seeping out the minerals. But that's okay, because if it's still barely started and you apply fluoride, you actually increase the chance of the tooth remineralizing and still turning into a fluoroapatite tooth, to where the tooth rebuilds into being even stronger than it was before. So as long as you're brushing pretty frequently, that is the main thing you want to do to protect yourself. Because remember, it's always a process happening constantly. And it's not just a process on the losing side. You have natural elements in your body already that fight these cavities, such as saliva and things of that nature. They act as buffers to not allow the pH to sway but too much. But still there will be pH sway, and because people don't brush that often, especially not as often as like something like a miswax would require, then the presence of fluoride really allows for, when you brush, making that potent, so you can remineralize your tooth and make your tooth already a little stronger on the outside with a naturally occurring element that simply just makes it harder to deal with for those bacteria to cause a negative effect. So that's the main purpose of like toothpaste. Toothpaste contains a few other things in there, depending on the brand, but the main thing you're getting from it, besides the mintiness, is the fluoride remineralization part of things. So, you definitely want to do that. And the frequency of that are the most important thing. Even if you don't have fluoride, if you brush very frequently, like we did with the Miswak, which has some fluoride on it because it naturally occurs in that tree, which is why they chose it, but not as potent as, of course, like a Crest toothpaste or something like that, or one of those brands. But what about those x-rays that I showed you earlier? The thing is, fluoride wouldn't prevent many of those cavities. Why? Because those are in between the teeth. You can't really brush those away. Make sure you floss. This is why flossing is very important. You're cleaning the sides of your teeth. And if you think about your teeth have about 6 sides to them. 2 or a third of which are in between the teeth. So when you're not flossing, you're literally saying, I'm not gonna clean a third of my tooth. What if you say, I'm not gonna wash a third of my body? That's crazy. You see what I'm saying? Like, you need to make sure you thoroughly clean the teeth, even in between there. Now, to do that, you can use regular string floss, as we all know, or you can use a water floss or a water pick. I'm not gonna lie, when I was in school, they were teaching us that the string floss is the most effective, and you should only really use the water floss as an adjunct, or if you have dexterity issues, something like that. Or braces or something like that. But a lot more modern research is showing things of the contrary. They're actually showing that water flossers are just as good, if not better in some studies, in removing plaque in between teeth than the regular string floss. So at the end of the day, or you can use these floss picks right here. Some people don't think these are as good because they don't think they bend as much to try to clean the teeth. You're just trying to make if this is your tooth, you're trying to get a side of the tooth and just kind of, get the stuff from under there. But, takeaway from this is just clean in between your teeth. Whatever is most convenient for you. If you want to use a string floss, a floss, or a water floss, just get something in between your teeth so you can also clean a third of the tooth, which is captured in between the teeth. That's essentially about, what caused the cavity. Now, in that, I have a little questionnaire that I want to run through. Let's see what causes a cavity. Who's been paying attention? If you're ready to answer these, just 5 questions. Here we go. What factor directly causes dental cavity? All right, so we see sugar as an answer choice. We already know that sugar can lead to cavity formation, but I don't know if sugar is directly going to cause it, because if you have sugar and no acid, you don't have a cavity. Acid directly causes it. Bacteria produces the acid from eating the sugar. Toothbrush abrasion, you'd have to have some really serious toothbrush abrasion to cause a cavity, so this is pretty far out there. And that just means, abrasion just means like when you just brush too hard, and you kind of remove tooth structure so much so that you kind of create a little divot or a whole cavity, so to speak. It's possible. It's not very probable. So, maybe a bad question, maybe not, who cares? Number 2, do you need fluoride to prevent tooth decay? So, do you need fluoride to prevent tooth decay? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. If you answered no, you would be correct. Remember, fluoride helps significantly. Practically, you want to use fluoride to really help yourself not have to clean your teeth all the time, and give yourself a better shot. That's what you want to have fluoride for. And if you have a little bit of tooth decay going on, but it's still superficial, fluoride can actually help reverse that and stop that from happening. So fluoride, and it's a naturally occurring thing, so I wouldn't worry too much about fluoride. If you're worried about fluorosis, which is too much fluoride, just don't drink it and stuff. Like, don't swallow toothpaste. Just put it on your teeth. It will do good for it. Does fluoride significantly help in preventing and remineralizing tooth decay? So we did just kind of answer that. So the answer would be yes. Fluoride does significantly help in preventing and remineralizing tooth decay. So preventing it, and remember, it substitutes for the hydroxide ion to make it nice and strong, a strong molecule. And if you already start to lose a little bit, that little demineralization process, you can apply fluoride to speed up and induce the remineralization process, so you kind of don't get stuck with an actual cavity. Number 4, can water flossers be adequate substitutes for string floss? And the answer to this is yes, according to the research that I've linked there. Not according to my dental school professors, who literally told me opposite, but hey, shout out to them. You know, we're always learning in the dental field. It may have been the case. Maybe they made water flosses better since then. Maybe just, you know, more research has come out since then. You know? Anyway, number 5. What is the most important aspect of brushing teeth to prevent cavities? Is it A, brushing at night? B, use of fluoride? C, brushing technique? D, brushing frequency? All right, now, again, you should have answered D. Brushing at night. Brushing at night, very important. Actually, at night, your saliva production goes down, despite many of you droolers. And remember, saliva is one of the main things that protect us from getting cavities. It's nature's buffer to help prevent your mouth from getting too acidic. And it also has some antibiotics and other things that fight cavities in there. But the main thing is its buffering effect to not allow things to be super acidic. So when you go to sleep, you know, you stop producing as much of that, and you actually become more prone to dental cavities at night. So, you know, make sure you brush before you go to bed. But it's not most important. So it is important, not most important. Use of fluoride, we talked about, very important. Remember, it makes the tooth stronger, helps remineralize the teeth. Very important, not most important. We can still prevent cavities without having any fluoride present. C, brushing technique, also very important. You want to make sure you brush very thoroughly and effectively. Now, I would say, in my opinion, most people don't really brush perfectly anyway. So even though technique is important, not the most important. In my estimation, brushing frequency is the most important. You just want to disrupt that process of demineralization and start the process of remineralization as frequently as possible. Don't allow food to sit on your teeth so that bacteria can use them to produce acid. Just constantly brush it off, disrupt that process, and you'll be good. So, like, this is one example I tell kids: it's much more damaging for your teeth to take, you know, a couple pieces of candy and just constantly chew it throughout the day and then brush your teeth at night than it is if you took a whole bag of candy and ate it all at one time and then brushed your teeth, you know, a few minutes after that. Because again, on the second example, your tooth or your teeth wouldn't be exposed to such a prolonged acidic environment as it would, even though the first one you had less candy overall, you had it for a much longer period of time exposed to your tooth. So it's all about the frequency. So that's the end of that video today. Just what causes a cavity. I'm also gonna have another video coming out soon about what is a dental filling. If you liked this video, if you enjoyed it, you know, I'm trying to do more of these dental education type of things. Like, comment, subscribe. It really means a lot to me. New small creator, just starting making some content because why not? You know, I don't want to use these things forever. All right, but that's it for today. I'm Tooth God. That's what causes a dental cavity. And yeah.
I know they mad. I hold my cross up in a crisis more than Satan. I told my niggas I'm the chosen. They like, amen. Raindrops can't control me. It made me see them.